Hello and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental enthusiasts, Nick and Laura. On today's episode, Laura quizzes me on NEPA terms. We interview Fred Wagner about the court's reshaping agency power, uncertainty over NEPA rules, and sticking to core environmental values. And finally, here are some random fun facts about capybaras, the world's largest rodent. Despite their pig-like proportions, capybaras are semi-aquatic and love hanging out in water. They're highly social. They tend to live in groups of 10 to 20 individuals, and they tend to live around 12 years in captivity, which is almost double their lifespan in the wild. I'll just add that they're also kind of like adorable and seem to have no mean temperament at all in their vibe. So that's pretty cool. Hit that music. ACRA's 31st annual conference will be held in Raleigh, North Carolina from September 11th through the 14th at the Sheraton Raleigh Hotel. This year's conference theme is Policy and Protecting Cultural Resources, and it is intended to explore how policy intersects with the protection of cultural resources. This includes federal policy, state policies, and the involvement of communities and other stakeholders. Register now at www.acra-crm.org. Let's get to our segment. All right, so.
Okay, today's segment.
Yeah, we talked to Fred.
We did talk to Fred, and I would like to do a speed round of questions for you.
Oh, no.
Related to policy definitions.
Okay, cool.
Ready?
No.
Which speed round just means like, give me your fastest response of what it is as quickly as you can.
All right.
Because then, some of our listeners who might not know what these terms are might have a little bit of context before we roll into it.
Right. Very fair. Very good. Now I know what you were doing. Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Here we go.
Ready? Mm-hmm. I'm going to start easy. EIS.
Environmental Impact Statement. It's a big document that we write for big projects.
Okay. What's the trigger?
The trigger, it would be like what causes it to actually get to a certain level. So there's a trigger for it being an environmental assessment, trigger for it to be an environmental impact statement. It's like what is the federal trigger is basically like, what is it? Is it a federal project? Is it a major federal action? That's what it means.
Okay. And then the other one I'm already actually forgetting, EAS?
So there's an EIS, EA, and CE.
EA.
You say.
EA, the next one. Go.
So EAs are environmental assessments. CEs are categorical exclusions. You can also hear them, sometimes they're called CADXs. And it's actually quite adorable that we have multiple abbreviations for the shortest NEPA document. That always tickles me, actually. But so they're just the three levels of NEPA. So there's categorical exclusions are the simplest and easiest. Usually take about a month. EAs are kind of a mid-tier one. They usually take about a year. And then EISs are supposed to take 2, but often take 5. So
okay.
Or longer.
Hence, when we get to the interview, your prize at a 20-day EIS.
Yeah. Usually, the standard for EIS is 2 years. So doing it in 28 days doesn't make any sense.
Right. Okay. Now let's back this up. NEPA.
NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. That is the main way that federal agencies comply with natural environmental law just in the country. So that's kind of like an umbrella statute that everybody gets to kind of put everything in one place. So you don't have to go looking for the Fish and Wildlife Service, for the Endangered Species Act or Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act. It's all in one place. We're all talking about these actions in one place.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And up next, we have one that is mitigation FONSI.
Mitigated FONSI is, okay, so imagine you have a project that if you do nothing to it, right? If you just build it the way it's supposed to be built, it should be an EIF, right? So maybe it's in critical habitat. We'll say that. So it's going to impact an endangered species. But if you build new habitat for this species to offset the old habitat, you are mitigating the issue away. So it's no longer an issue. You've now mitigated it from an EIS to an EA. So you've reduced the impact to it. And that's not usually how they work, honestly, because changing critical habitats doesn't really work. But that's the idea anyway.
Okay. What's the FONSI part?
Ooh, wow. Great. See, I don't even think about this. I don't even think about it. I forget everyone knows what FONSI is. What are you talking about?
And I'm like, everyone knows this is a mitigation. What's the FONSI?
FONSI is a finding of no significant impact. When you get a FONSI, right, which is something that an EIS doesn't have, actually, it's only for EAs and only for environmental assessments. A FONSI, finding of no significant impact, is actually saying, we did the analysis, nothing significant is happening, therefore the project, you can make the decision, and our decision is XYZ based on the action. So that's something that shows up for EAs. So EISs will have something called a ROD, which is a record of decision, that shows this is where we have significant impacts and this is how we're going to manage or mitigate them, but there will still be significant impacts. And here they are.
Okay. And that one always cracks me up when Fred says it, because to me, Fred is like the Fonzie of attorneys. He's just like so cool. He's a New Yorker.
Yeah. Oh man, I love that.
All right. Last one, I think, and I'm probably saying this wrong too. Chevron deference.
Yeah. So Chevron deference was a case years ago, and it was like Chevron as in the actual oil company, Chevron, what you're thinking of. So they just called it Chevron deference, like, how something just gets a name, but it's basically like Chevron deference going away. What that means basically is that the agencies no longer have the ability to just tell others like, hey, we are the decision makers. We are the experts. You have to listen to us. And that Chevron case, initially, that's what was said. It's like the experts are telling you this is what's supposed to happen. So you have to do what the experts are telling you. Now, Chevron deference is saying is gone. That means that Congress is actually going to be deciding what the agencies are telling other people what to do. So when I was saying earlier, it's like the removal of Chevron versus the Seven County case, right? So Seven County gave agencies deference. Chevron took it away. And it's really confusing for lots of people. But like for me, it's basically the agencies are now able to tell themselves what to do and they can follow that, but they don't necessarily have the ability to tell others what to do without Congress's approval. And that's the difference. Right. It's silly, but yeah, that's where we are.
Fascinating. Those are the ones I wanted to cover. So when people listen to this interview, they kind of can be engaged and follow along.
Glide in.
And
very cool.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more, NAEP has NEPA trainings, workshops all the time.
That's true.
And actually, at the conference, as Fred mentions in the interview, him, Pam, who were the other two? Michael. They always get together and review cases as well.
Yeah. Case law update. Always very fascinating. There's another one coming up as well. They do like a virtual one as well. So worth checking out on naep.org.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to that interview.
Cool deal. Welcome back to EPR. Today we have Fred Wagner, Principal Environmental Advisor of Environmental Solutions for Jacobs. And he's also our go-to legal correspondent, here to help us make sense of the whirlwind of regulatory changes coming out of the district. It's great to see you again, Fred.
It's great to see you both.
Yeah, Laura.
Hi.
Fred, I'm going to start there. There's so much going on sometimes. I feel like it's hard to keep track of it all, right? I have a theory I'm going to pose to you at some point, but I want to know, what else am I missing? What is the new stuff since the last time we talked? Honestly, we haven't talked since Seven County. So that case has been decided, right? We know the outcome of that. So maybe we start there and then we work on everything that's come out since.
Yeah, the outcome. Do I know the outcome?
Yeah, you don't know the outcome? Everyone knows the outcome. No, everyone that I know knows the outcome.
Yeah. So Fred, it's been a while since we've had you on. The Seven County case was decided. Honestly, I know there's a lot going on. There's been a lot of things going on. I could start there. I could start with Union Station and what's happening in DC.
Yeah, why don't we start there? I mean, it's just, for people listening around the country, just see what's going on their televisions. Yeah, it is a bizarre way to live and work in the city now. Yeah, Union Station is my station of choice. So when I work downtown at the Jacobs offices there, and two big Humvees and National Guardsmen sitting right outside the metro station as I walk by every morning. And what's the strangest thing, of course, is that but for their presence, everything is exactly the same.
Yes.
I see the same people when I'm walking in and out of the metro. The same folks who accost me in the station or at the station for the most part are there. The cabs are still there, but yet there are these huge vehicles and people in uniform right near the station. And that's been the case, near a lot of the sort of public tourist areas around town. So it's really bizarre and sad. What we're seeing is a real reduction in the number of people coming downtown.
Yeah.
It's an impediment for people who to do that. Maybe less so for the tourists, perhaps, but certainly for the folks in and around the DMV who like to go to the district for dinner or for shows or whatnot. We don't want to.
Yeah. I mean, gosh. Yeah. I literally canceled a night in the city just because I didn't feel like dealing with the possibility of going through all that, because it's just
exactly.
Yeah.
So what's the actual possibility? Are they harassing people or stopping people, or they're just there?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, in 97% of the time, they're just standing there.
Yeah.
And the other 3%, when they're looking for something to do, they're doing non-police stuff. There's stories of them picking up trash around town, which again, I'm grateful for, keep picking up trash, but I don't know if we need them for that. They are clearing out homeless encampments.
Yeah.
They're doing that. And then there are certain places where they are enforcing laws in concert with the local police. But those are the exceptions to the rule. And there hasn't been a marked increase in arrests or things like that in the city since they've been around. But, right now they're not going anywhere. So it's been a real bizarre time to be there. I got to tell you, as someone who's worked in the city now for nearly 40 years and have gone through so many different phases and stages of, the district, neighborhoods come and go, they rise and fall. The Capital One arena gets built. The Nats Park gets built. The neighborhood behind Union Station gets built. Other places, rise and fall. The convention center's torn down, a new one's built. And you see these rhythms in the city, but you certainly have never felt it like it is now. So it's a strange thing. Even going past the Supreme Court, we're going to talk about that in a minute. You walk by and see people outside the Supreme Court. They'll be back out there in October when the Supreme Court comes back in session for sure, as patrolling. So it's a sad thing, and I just pray it doesn't spread to too many other cities, because I think the people who live there they're not supportive of it. And it doesn't necessarily make life better for folks. It's tough.
Being candid, like going through a checkpoint on 295 in the morning, it's not great. That's not great for traffic just by itself, which already stinks here.
Exactly.
That's the one that really, really got to me. I'm just like, you got to be kidding me that we have to go through this right now. So yeah, it's not great. I don't love it.
But we'll persevere. We'll persevere. We'll get through it. So to happier times, well, for me at least, because I won. The decision came out. The decision came out at the beginning of the summer, Nick, and it was an 8-zip, victory. And we got everyone on the court except for Gorsuch, who recused himself and was cheering on from the sidelines. I bet.
Right.
But we got the liberals to join the majority opinion, and the thrust of the 7-county ruling was what Justice Kavanaugh called the need for a course correction in the way NEPA is handled in the courts following agency action. And that's just a fundamentally important and meaningful statement. The opinion reads a lot like a policy statement more than a legal opinion in many instances, because that's what it is. I mean, it reflected the majority, the whole courts, but Kavanaugh's view that the process had become too much, too involved, too long, too complicated, and courts weren't giving the appropriate deference to agencies when they went through all that. So as long as the agencies did a reasonable effort at looking at alternatives, looking at impacts, what the Supreme Court said was that should be enough. That should be fine. And also, agencies shouldn't have to look at a overly expansive scope of effects beyond the project itself. If you recall, 7-county, we were dinged by the DC Circuit for not looking at air emissions from refineries in Louisiana, and our railroad was proposed for rural Utah.
Right.
And the Supreme Court, very common sense, said that doesn't seem right. Yeah. And even the liberals on the court, in the concurring opinion, the liberals said, and you know what? Even if you had all that information and you could assess it in a way that was reasonable, it doesn't contribute to the agency's decision. The Surface Transportation Board doesn't have jurisdiction over any of that. So how would that information educate the decision maker? Even the liberals said, so it was a slam dunk victory. And so then the question immediately became, now what?
Yeah.
Now what? And over the last couple of months, we've seen it. Yeah. And we've seen the now what in, I'd say, three major ways. First, we're seeing court rulings coming down, citing 7 County with amazing amounts of deference to the agencies. They're listening. They're listening to the Supreme Court. And, they're reviewing it. They're taking what they call the hard look still, but they're not second guessing. They're not nitpicking. And they've taken the Supreme Court ruling too hard. And it isn't just one, Nick and Laura. There are right now at least 8 or 9 rulings out there where federal courts have said, we've seen these arguments. The people challenging the NEPA review say it wasn't done enough, but you know what? It's not our job to second guess. And that's been that. So this has been a very strong trend to accepting the Supreme Court's caution about deference in a real way. Second major thing that's happened is, at least a dozen different federal agencies have now issued their own NEPA procedures.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I have.
And what they did was they relied heavily on the messaging of 7 County.
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be arguments about whether the administration's procedures take 7 County and extend it too far, possibly. But there's no question that they relied on it, because all you have to do is read the procedures and they quote the case. They quote the case in their new procedures. So, so far, I've only seen one agency that has retained their NEPA regulations, and that was the Federal Highway Administration, Federal Transit Administration, Federal Railroad Administration under USDOT. All the other agencies that have issued interim final rules in the Federal Register were withdrawing existing NEPA regulations and relying only on procedures and guidance.
Right.
And those procedures and guidance, in turn, relied very, very heavily on 7 County.
Wouldn't they say, like, they're kind of, I don't want to say they're identical, but they're all really, really similar to each other.
And that's a great point. So when folks said, hey, wait a minute, how are we going to follow everything that's coming out? Because there's, dozens of different agencies and sub-agencies. How are we going to follow all these rules? When you take a moment and you do an overlay of one agency versus the other, you see the common themes coming up over and over and over again. There are some differences, right? And I think the option that the administration chose to allow agencies to write their own procedures was to grant them the maximum amount of flexibility. The maximum flexibility, so that if there is a difference in the programs between one agency, they could take a different tack. The best example of that is the Department of the Interior. Department of the Interior, because they are, the tip of the spear for the administration's energy policies, have instituted new policies to do EAs in 14 days, EISs in 28 days for certain projects that they favor. And they can do that because as a guidance, not as a procedure, but not as a regulation, they have that flexibility to apply these new rules on a potentially a one-off basis. And we've seen some of these NEPA documents being done that quickly for certain types of projects. So the second major way was all these new rules, guidance, and procedure that's coming out from the agencies. And there's more to come. We saw the first tranche of them at the end of June, early July. And there's going to be another batch of them because they have to be finished by next year.
Right.
Arguably, many of the important agencies have done their work already, but there's a lot more to come. And, I think the third way it's had a major impact is on Congress, is on the legislative branch. And we're already seeing proposals that our Congress I know we're recording today, at the end of August. Congress comes back next week and the new legislative session starts. And already we've seen some legislative proposals drop for more NEPA reform, more permit reform. And if you read some of the language that's been dropped, lo and behold, it almost quotes the 7 County opinion verbatim. So when I said last year that the potential impact of this case, I couldn't understate it, again, I was right. I'm not right all the time, but I seem to be right about this stuff a lot. But it's a huge impact, and it's going to continue to have a huge impact, going forward as we see some more of the regulations come out and some more of the legislative proposals come out. Now, the one caveat is we have not yet seen new NEPA cases. By that, I mean NEPA documents performed, completed under these new procedures, and then challenged in court under the new framework of 7 county. Do you see what I'm saying? So the decisions I've seen so far are decisions that have said, hey, this has already been done. The case was litigated. We had all the briefs. We had oral argument. We were just waiting to see what the Supreme Court told us to do. Hey, they told us what to do. We're done here. That's fine. I mean, that's important. But what's really going to be important is when we have a brand new EA, EIS, and there's another point I'm going to make in a minute. And then the court says, okay, we have these new procedures, these new guidelines. We have the Supreme Court's, instructions to us on how we should review this. And voila, this is how we're going to do it. We haven't seen those yet. We've seen one so far as of the date of this recording. And it's a fascinating one. And it goes to my other point that everybody's got to be aware of. One of the common themes in all the procedures and guidance, and again, the little bit of regulation that came out that you point out, Nick, and I'm sure you've spotted this, is a concentration of the agencies on whether NEPA is triggered at all.
Yeah.
In other words, many of the procedures say, hey, we're going to look carefully at whether there's a major federal action. Right. That phrase, major federal action. Now, for years, and I'm talking years, like 40 years, we haven't been looking at that. It was just assumed if there's federal approval, if there's federal money, that's it.
Yeah.
That's the hook. It was like the principles called small handles. There were small handles under NEPA. If either of those things happened, you were doing NEPA. And that's because early on, after NEPA was passed in the early 70s, the agencies were being kind of stubborn about complying.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Can you imagine? We don't want to do that. Why should we do that? And so they litigated. Yeah. They litigated. Well, it isn't major.
Right.
And then they said, well, even if it's major, it's really not federal,
Right.
And if it's major and it's federal, well, maybe it's not really an action. I mean, they were literally parsing every word.
Right.
Just to try to get out of it. And eventually the court said, just stop. Just stop.
Yeah.
And they did, because they said, look, it's obvious what Congress had intended here. They want the federal government to look before it leaps. That means whenever it leaps, it should look. Yeah. And here are the handles, and there are approval handles, and there's money handles. That's it. Go away. Well, here we are like 40 years later, and the administration has said, no, we're going to parse that phrase again. We're going to parse it. And if it's not major, we don't think NEPA might be triggered at all. And so what does that mean? Well, what if it's just a little bit of federal funding? It's $1 million project and the feds are only giving $50,000, like a seed grant. I'm just making this up.
Right.
Well, I anticipate arguments from agencies to say that's not a major federal action. No NEPA. Or what if it's just a loan?
Oh, wow.
We're just loaning money. That's all. And all our interest is in getting money back for our loan. We don't have anything else to do with the project. Or what if we're just doing, giving money for planning, but we have nothing to do with the implementation, the construction, the ongoing operation of the thing that's being built? Well, that's a very small federal role. There's going to be plenty of instances here where the administration is going to say, look, we don't even think NEPA applies. And I said, we had one, and there's already been a ruling on it that will be appealed. And by the time this is heard, I'm sure an appeal will be noted. And that's the ICE facility in the Everglades.
Yeah. I had it written down. I was like, that's the first one right there. Yeah.
That is number one. And so what happened?
For our listeners, that's Alligator Alcatraz is what we're talking about, not something else.
You see, I'm not, that's the phrase. I didn't want to use it.
I know, but that's what people know it as. So we just want to make sure they're not going, is that a different thing? No, same thing.
No, that's the same.
Well, fair enough, Laura. I was trying to just.
But no, please omitted from here on out. Just wanted to make
politically neutral, generic.
I mean, it is just what happened. That's what happened.
It is what happened. So they built the thing, and they did zero NEPA. They didn't do an EA. They didn't do an EIS. They didn't declare a categorical exclusion. They didn't do any level of NEPA at all.
Right.
And people sued. And they sued. They, in part, building it in the Everglades is pretty bad. It is a very sensitive ecological area, and you ignored all that. And the district court judge last week said, you're right. They did, and they shouldn't have.
Right.
And there's a bunch of other stuff in the ruling. It's 80 pages, but there's about 10 or 15 pages where the court goes into detail explaining why, I think it was a she, rejected the federal government's argument that it was not federalized. They tried to argue that the facility is really being built and operated by the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it's really not an ICE facility, and so no NEPA. That sounds familiar because that's consistent with that guidance I just described to you.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
But the district court judge said no. And she went on for like 10 or 15 pages about, I can tell you about all the different ways that ICE is involved in the management operation of this facility. Of course, it's federal.
Right.
And so she ordered it, she issued an injunction, I think ordered it deconstructed within 60 days. Now, the federal government's going to appeal before that time. There's no doubt. But my point is, that is the very, very first case that came out testing this theory of major federal action. Yeah. And it just happened to be in a very highly publicized and controversial right. Project. And who would have known that NEPA would rear its head in the immigration debate?
Yeah. I was shocked too.
Literally, for myself who does not watch news, no surprise to anybody. When I heard it, someone mentioned it actually on the podcast. I had to run and go, wait, what? I didn't know that. Yeah. Then I'm looking at it and I'm thinking it's being underdone because of human rights issues. And I was actually surprised. It was environmental.
Yeah, it was neat.
It was an environmental case. Crazy. I mean, with everything else that's going on. So we're going to see more of this. The problem, of course, is how does a community know that NEPA hasn't been triggered?
I know. That's actually, I was literally about to ask you that.
You're just flattering me. You're just telling me that I'm anticipating everything you're going to say. It's not true.
I mean, I literally have Alligator Alcatraz written right here. All right.
Okay. I'll give you credit for that. But yeah, so the question, it's like I've been telling people at speeches, it's the old Sherlock Holmes story. When Holmes solved the mystery because the dog didn't bark. I don't know if you remember that story, but yeah, somebody was sneaking in and the dog didn't bark, and he solved it because that meant obviously the dog knew the person that was coming in to do the crime, and the dog didn't bark. Well, how do we know in these instances if the dog doesn't bark?
Right.
Now with the ICE facility, the Alligator Alcatraz, they built it.
Yeah.
So we knew.
Yeah.
But, for other instances where an agency decides that their financial obligation is too small, or they make a decision that there's not a big federal role in the project moving forward, they're not going to document that. They're not going to put something in the Federal Register. Hey, just letting everybody know this project out there. We're not doing NEPA.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. And there's going to be like two or more, but at least two major threads of litigation that's going to happen now through the fall and into next year. First thread is this major federal action thread. How many instances where the agency is going to take that position and then folks find out about it, then they have to run to court, right? So and they're going to test it. Does that work under the rubric of, the existing statute? And Seven County didn't touch that. Seven County didn't touch major federal action. This is the administration's own making, as is it's their right to do so under the procedures, but that's going to be tested. Second major thread, and again, I'm sure you notice this in all the procedures, is just the huge emphasis on categorical exclusions.
Yeah.
They're going to be trying to fit as many actions into category CEs as humanly possible. And that because the procedures have this hierarchy of steps that each agency has to do whenever there is a major federal action. They're not going to make that argument. Right. Is there a CE? Step one. If there's not a CE, can you amend an existing CE? If you can't amend an existing CE, can you borrow a CE from another agency? If you can't amend one and you can't borrow one, should you write a new CE, right? In every set of procedures from all the agencies, there's this hierarchy thing. So the message is bloody clear. You should be using CEs as much as humanly possible. And if there's ever been a doubt that, at least in the short term, the number of full EISs and even environmental assessments that are being prepared by the agencies is going to drop precipitously. And so whereas in years past, at the annual meeting, with my buddies Pam and Michael and Melanie, when we talk about all our cases, we had a very few cases on categorical exclusions. Yeah. Now we're going to have more.
Right.
Now we're going to have more because it's just going to be used more. And just this whole dynamic of, how can an agency legitimately take a project out of an EIS world and into an EA? How can they legitimately take it from an EA to a CE? All that's going to be happening more and more because the procedures send a clear message to all decision makers at every agency that the level of review is going to be the lowest level possible, defensible, and that's the direction they're going to be going.
So, oh man, okay, I got to ask then, when we talk about defensible, because I think that's a lot of times what people are wondering, because some of what's happened and some of what's changed, it's like, okay, but if we think this is going to get sued, we still are going to do our EA or EIS because we think that this is going to lose as a categorical exclusion. Like, I'm sure that'll still happen, but how are agencies going to be able to determine what is actually defensible? Like, we kind of are, I almost feel like we're in a blind spot for what the courts are going to decide. We don't really know. So what I've seen is agencies be cautious still. And maybe there's going to be some cases that come down that change that, but what counts as defensible? There's obvious ones where it's like, okay, this is very clearly in critical habitat. So you can't say that this is a CE because XYZ, but maybe there are others that are grayer where they could.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where Seven County comes back in, because the message of Seven County, and as we've seen from some of the cases that have been handed down so far, is, this greater deference. And so the question is, are courts going to apply the deference to those types of decisions, Nick, in addition to the more traditional decisions about was there a reasonable range of alternatives and did you look at the effects enough? Those, it's pretty clear. But what about these fundamental decisions like, we've mitigated enough, so there are no significant effects because we put in mitigation, so this is a mitigated FONSI. They can be doing that more. Or, this may not fit precisely into the CE, but we're going to amend it slightly to do so. And is that kind of procedural step legitimate? Those are the types of things where Seven County may not answer, but I'm telling you where you've seen some caution, I've seen the opposite.
Okay.
I've seen agencies saying, look, we have greater freedom, greater liberty to do things here now that may not have been defensible in the past under the rubric of some courts taking, the second guess approach. But now Supreme Court has said not to do that. So it's going to be worth a chance. And I'm not a betting man, but if I were, I would say that this Department of Justice would be more willing to take those chances and let somebody challenge it and see what happens in court, given the new standard. Again, that's what I said. Remember this, I said the new generation of cases may be different from the ones that have been pending. That's part of it.
Yeah.
And I've been counseling clients to say, look, all things being equal, if there's only two choices in this world, and they're not, but if there's only two choices in this world, being more aggressive or being more cautious.
Right.
Your compliance strategy now should lean towards more aggressive. And those are the only two choices. Now I know it's not as simple as that.
I have seen some of the other two. It's not like I've only seen caution. So it's one of the reasons I wanted to ask, because sometimes we get in our perspectives, and some clients it doesn't matter, and some clients are like, well, we're still going to do what we do until we see that thing change. So that's interesting to see.
The other factor I'd add, Nick, is that there's just, where we started the conversation, there's just so much coming out every day affecting every aspect of environmental practice, that the other reality is that the usual suspect opponents of project or project development, there's so many things that they have to cover, so many things that are going on. The other reality is some things that they might otherwise choose to challenge in court, they may not because of limited resources and choices they have to make about what they're going to pursue. So again, all things being equal, I'm going to give a false choice again. If you are an advocacy group, an NGO, and you want to save your shekels to file a challenge against the revocation of the endangerment finding under the Clean Air Act, or to file an APA litigation over a decision that a particular highway isn't going to trigger an EIS because federal funding isn't enough, where are you going to put your money? I'm betting it's on the endangerment finding.
Yeah.
Or, the interpretation of WOTUS that's going to come out in the next month, which we know is going to be very narrow. And so, these are fundamental things that have broad implications across the country that may garner their money and attention and legal resources more than even individual projects that on any other given day, that same organization might say, this is ridiculous. We're going to see you in court. They may not have the wherewithal to do it just because there's so much out there.
So how do you feel?
Oh my gosh. So you're telling me that these organizations have to decide which lawsuit they would like to deliver and spend their time on?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, they have to raise money. They have to raise money, and there's only so much out there. And so again, I don't work with those organizations, but it's common sense to think that they're looking at each other around their rooms and saying, this is what we got in our coffers. These are the 13, 14, 15, 20 things that we have to address. Where are we going to devote our time and energy?
Yeah, I can see Laura. Yeah, I can just see it. I can see the concern on your face. I can just see it.
Well, it's, like we all know, is one issue just snowballs into 1,000 other ones. And the bigger issues, like you said, this is just still the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Now, on the one hand, there's that reality of, as I think the Republicans have used the phrase flooding the zone. They're flooding the zone with everything. And certainly they're doing that in the environmental sphere, in addition to everything else that's going on. But the next phase of all this will be when courts finally start providing feedback, and then challenges go up to the appellate court, and then they can't all go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's not going to hear everything, trust me.
Right. Yeah, they can't.
It's hard enough to get my case. They're not going to do every environmental case.
Right.
But that's going to be sort of the next phase. So things like reliance on the emergency declaration for the energy executive orders, that ruling hasn't come out, and other rulings where there's a reliance on the emergency declarations, that's going to affect a lot of this. The interpretation of the statutes from the agencies under the Clean Air Act for the endangerment finding falls squarely under, the Loper-Bright decision and the revocation of the Chevron deference principle. That's going to be a major decision that comes out that's going to have implications for many of these regulations, not just one of them. And then there's going to be the other types of challenges where if the federal government isn't pursuing enforcement in certain of these disciplines, air, water, hazards, then those statutes that allow for citizen suits, you're going to see citizen suits filling that gap, or you're going to see states fill the gap on enforcement in the states that hew in that direction.
Right.
And so the first phase is keeping track of everything, filing challenges to the fundamental things that environmental groups and others want to challenge, just to see if they could stop it for at least a short period of time. And then the next phase is going to be, well, where else is this enforcement going to happen? How else is this going to happen? And I'm predicting a lot of activity on the citizen suit side. I'm predicting a lot of activity on the state side, and the federal government doesn't control that.
Right.
The federal government doesn't control that. And so, that dynamic is going to make things, I think, more complicated still, because whereas we used to have our focus on, the federal family, and we sort of use that as the bellwether for all things related to litigation in the environmental world. And there was state stuff going on for sure, but we really look to EPA. We really look to the federal Interior and the Army Corps. Who knows where it's going to come from now? It can come from multiple directions. And so Federal litigation may become more challenging for the environmental NGOs because of 7 county principles, because of lack of local right deference. There can be a whole bunch of things that make it difficult. But where it makes it complicated and difficult for developers and for industry is the sort of diversity of challenges and directions where these challenges will come from.
Yeah.
And so, you're going to have to be looking left and right and behind you.
Yeah.
Because you don't know exactly where all this is going to happen. So, hey, Mazel Tov, they overturned the PFAS Superfund standards.
Right.
So we're not going to have PFAS covered as hazardous substances for cleanups under the Superfund statute. Hey, great. That's great. Well, the state's going to turn around and do something. Or there's going to be a community group that's going to file a toxic tort case.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So it's going to come at you from lots of different directions. So Laura, when you made your point earlier about, you mean they really have to choose? I mean, yes and no, they do have to choose, but there's going to be more players doing more things in different ways to sort of engage this whole issue is my prediction.
Right.
And that makes it more complicated, but I think that's what's going to happen.
Okay. So, oh gosh, man, I almost want to go back to.
You want to go back to why I stopped being a lawyer because with all that going on,
no, I got it.
I could be busy until I'm 120.
I know you'll never stop working. Oh my gosh. Well, okay. So and this is kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'm not, this isn't even the right question to ask you right now, but there's just a lot of stuff going through, ping-ponging through my head. And when I hear like a 28-day EIS, like to me, I feel like, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it feels like to me, 7 county was kind of like, okay, well, like the Chevron deference, that going away was basically like agencies can't tell other people what to do without approval. And 7 county was kind of like, they can tell themselves what to do. And when we have like something like a 28-day EIS, that kind of, for me, structures, first of all, believability anyway. Like if it's an EIS and you still need to have reports and filings, how does a 28-day EIS work when you have a biological opinion for that EIS that's going to require 135 days for the Fish and Wildlife Service to even look and review it before it goes back to you? So there's other laws that they're going to have to hit no matter how fast, quote unquote, you want to do an EIS. So it breaks my brain. Like, help me sort that out.
Yeah. So look, the Department of the Interior is not going to be using that flexibility for a brand new proposal that has never been studied before, that needs compliance with these other statutes and so forth. I mean, if they do, that would be reckless, but they're not. What they're going to do is going to say, hey, look, there's an action that is a follow-on from a coastal management plan, a range management plan, a coal lease plan, an oil and gas leasing plan, whatever. And so there's already been a whole bunch of NEPA analysis and NEPA review on this general principle and looking at this general area. What this is, they would argue, I predict, is a follow-on action that builds on that analysis already. So all we have to do is update it with particularity for this place, this location. And if there's, nothing tremendously different, that, they'll say, we're incorporating by reference the prior analysis. We're updating it with information specific to this place. There's no new need for a major public comment period or otherwise, because we've already approved the leasing plan. We've already approved the range management plan. So why would a particular permit or authorization tearing off of the broad scale planning document need more than 28 days?
Yeah.
I think that's how it's going to happen, Nick. Now, again, even for that, there's limitations. And I would agree with you that it does boggle the mind a little bit how you do that. But what we've seen already is the direction that public participation and public comment now is optional in certain agencies for certain EISs, right? So that's not necessarily going to be an impediment. So I think they're going to be selective, right? Okay. They have to be. But the history of the Interior's program, at least, is one that had, these massive EISs that went over for years and years dealing with a particular area, did look in pretty great detail about potential effects of, mixed use of public lands and all that kind of thing. But now they're going to say, okay, these add-on authorizations and permit approvals, where it's triggered by the initial broad scale analysis, and now there's site specific analysis building on one on top of another. That's where we can do quicker reviews. I think that's where they're headed.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I appreciate that because it really does break my brain to hear.
Now, nobody's told me that.
Yeah.
I haven't had Secretary Bergeron over in my house for coffee, so I don't know that.
It sounds like you're expecting there'll be a tiny bit of common sense in there, a sprinkle.
Well, I mean, look, the flexibility and an aggressive policy is only good to the extent that it can be sustained.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just using words. So they want to apply these in places where they have, at least a fighting chance to have their actions sustained. So that's why I say there's going to be, you call it common sense. I think there's going to be some discernment, in what they do and when they do it. But yeah, I think that's how it's going to happen. And similarly, when they borrow CEs or they're amending CEs, that's going to be done in areas where, it's not going to be the close calls where they do it. I think they're going to try to do it for the places where their attitude, not to be too colloquial, is, hey, you want to challenge us? Bring it on. Yeah, bring it on.
It just feels like a game of Monopoly where there's like the written rules and then there's like the house rules. Then whose rules are we playing with Monopoly today? I don't know. And then you get to like, I have this and I have this much money. Let me just make you a deal.
Well, now you're getting to a place where I'm going not to comment. You may comment as host and podcast extraordinaire, but I, as your humble legal expert, will politely acknowledge and move on.
Well played, sir.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, we're already almost out of time because there's so much going on here, and I don't know, Fred, if there's something, other bit of advice, other bit of policy that you're seeing, like what do our listeners need to know about all these changes? What else have we not touched on?
Let me narrow it down to a different question if I can.
Sure.
Which is really like kind of the hardest question of all. And I got this at an internal presentation I made in the company, and somebody asked, perfectly legitimately, like, how do we balance all this with environmental values? How do we do that? We have that as a principle as professionals. We have those as you do in your company, as principles as a company. Yes. Our clients have that as core principles for their work. So like, what do we do? Because on the one hand, it would be almost per se negligence, not like legal negligence, but professional negligence, not to tell your client, hey, this might be a CE now.
Right.
Or, hey, if we do this or that, we may not have to do a full EIS. Or even, hey, I don't know if this is a major federal action in the current framework. Mm-hmm. How can you not say that, right? You almost have to put it out there on the table.
Yeah.
But my answer to the very difficult question was, there are still fundamental principles behind this work that don't change, which is we're trying to reach better decisions by engaging stakeholders and reaching better environmental outcomes. If you're working with a project developer, they still have the hands on the wheel in terms of the project, its features, its elements, its engineering. They still have the hands on the wheel in terms of outreach to their neighbors and the stakeholders. They still have their hands on the wheel, even in terms of what they present to the federal government. Now, are they going to be able to use the words climate change in an EAS? Not in the short term. We know that.
Right.
But are they going to be able to do a deep dive into the things that they think are important to them? Yeah, they totally can. And they can fit it into 75 pages for an EA and 150 pages or 300 for an EA. They can do that. So my point to the folks who asked the very difficult question was, we will find that balance as professionals to say, look, here's advice that I must tell you because it may be in your best interest and the project's best interest, your financial interest to do this, that, and the other thing. Yeah. But I'm also here as your ongoing partner to say that I agree with you. How are we going to reach a better environmental outcome? If these are truly the resources of concern that we think there's effects on here, how can we work with you to avoid, minimize, mitigate? Right. How do we do that? If there's a community that's really concerned and they've asked legitimate questions, how can I work with you to answer those questions? That principle doesn't go away.
Right.
So even while all this is happening, those principles, I think, are durable, and any professional worth their salt is going to pursue both.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I told people is that, this is going to be a rocky 3 years to try to figure this all out. And with all the legal challenges that we described and the procedures that are changing and flexibility and all that kind of stuff, it's going to be rocky to try to figure this all out. But just as day turns into night, there's going to be a new administration one day, and policies could change again.
Right.
And our job is to try to create something that's sustainable and durable, that can stem the tide,
right,
that can endure in this administration or in a subsequent administration or one after that. And that's not going to be apparent today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
But if we do that work and we adhere to our values and our principles, we will create something that's durable. We can, even in this very difficult period. So it wasn't a great answer, but it was the only answer I had at the time. And I trust that everybody listening is sort of, going through that in their own heads about how they will approach their jobs and their relationships with their clients and their obligations as professionals. And I encourage everybody listening to sort of write me and speak to me, say, here's how I'm doing it. And I think together and through NAEP and organizations like that, I think that's our challenge. Our challenge is to find something that endures through one administration and even into, January 2029.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's a great message, and I think it's realistic and optimistic, which is hard to do. So there you go. That's why we have
the tennis claps right now.
Right.
Yes. Oh, you mean like the ones on the emojis? Is that what that is? I thought it was a golf clap.
If we were using the sound animations that Nick had purchased at one point and we never actually engaged.
Oh gosh. There we go. Is that it? Did that go through? I know.
No, that just changed your voice for some reason. That was weird.
Did it really? That's funny. Yeah.
You're sitting
hey, look, I'm all for sound effects. Mostly wild cheers and applause, but that's good.
Sound effects is the word I was going for.
It's like, I was like, she's drowning. I'll let her do it. I don't know.
Sound animations, I think I said. Same difference.
Well, Fred, it's always a pleasure. Like I say, it always goes by so fast. I can't believe we talked this long already, but thank you as always for being part of the show.
Well, thank you. And I'll continue to keep track of everything, and look forward to being on the show again soon enough.
There we go. Thanks, Fred.
All right. Bye.
And that's our show. Thank you, Fred, for joining us today. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody. Bye.